everyone, my name's Madeline. Today we're going to be talking about three of the most powerful words: sex, power, and conflict. We've been studying these words all semester, and we're going to be studying how they can be backed by evolutionary standings. We're going to be looking at a research study that was first performed in 2003 by Alexander and Fisher. They looked at the sexual differences between men and women and their ideal number of sexual partners. After their study concluded, they were a little unsure of how true the results were, being that they didn't know if people chose certain answers because they were socially acceptable. So what did we study? We based our study off of the 2003 study, and we wanted to see this untruthful component of their study by hooking people up to polygraph tests. We wanted to see if there was a sexual difference between the number of ideal sexual partners that people had. So, who were our participants? Our participants were 66 Stockton University students, 36 women and 30 men. We asked them to complete an online survey which consisted of sexual life-related questions. So, what are the aspects of our study? So, the conditions of our study were three conditions. There was an observed, a not observed, and a control aspect of the study. The observed study, we connected participants to a polygraph machine as well as showed them that we were going to be observing them through a camera in the room across the hall. They were asked to complete the online survey, but were told that every time they were untruthful to a response, we would be alerted in the other room as well as the answer that they answered untruthfully. In the not observed condition, we connected them to the polygraph, but we did not observe them in the room across the hall. They were told that the conditions that they answered untruthfully we would be alerted of, but we wouldn't be available to see which questions they answered in particular untruthfully. Under the control condition, there was no polygraph or observation of the study. They were just simply asked to complete the online survey and that we would be alerted afterwards to take physiological measurements. Okay, so what was the process of our study? We first rolled a dice 1 through 6 to determine the randomility and assign each participant a condition. The participant was then asked to complete the online survey, and we then took physiological measurements. But the catch was that none of the participants were aware of was that the polygraph really wasn't hooked up to anything. It was simply to deter people's answers and make them become more truthful in their responses. So, what are the polygraph components that we used? We used an activity monitor, which people sat on while taking the survey, to measure their movements in their seats. We also used a clip on the index finger to measure the pulse rate, as well as finger sensors to measure the electricity between their skin response. And as well as we used a blood pressure cuff to maintain a blood pressure reading. So, the physiological measurements that we took were the waist, the height, the 2D and 4D measurements, as well as the hip measurements. The waist to hip ratio was something that we determined with the waist and the hip measurements, and the 2D, 4D is to monitor testosterone levels in the body. So, what were the sex differences between men and women? These are just some of the questions that were asked in the online survey. How attractive do others find you? How attractive do others find you in a long-term relationship? And how attractive do others find you in a short-term relationship? In our responses and results of the study, you can see here in the graph that we didn't really see a significant difference between attractive and overall and long-term attractiveness. The significant difference was in the short-term attractiveness, where women perceived themselves as more attractive than men did. Okay, so what were our findings? We found that in short-term mating, women perceive themselves as being more attractive than men. We can attribute this to the parental investment theory. Why can we attribute this to parental investment theory? Well, men are the lower investing sex and therefore determine that they want more sexual partners and perform more in short-term mating than women. Women would therefore perceive themselves as being more attractive in the short-term sense than men. Whereas women perform more in the long-term mating because they're the higher investing sex. They have more of a cost to choosing a bad mate. Being that this is the case, men would then lower their standards and not think that they are short-term mating partners. So, how this helped us understand people more? Although this was a small sample size that we conducted this research in, we can see that in the future, when we perform more research, we should see consistent results with what we found, and that the parental investment theory can be attributed to why there are sexual differences between the way women and men perceive themselves in short-term mating. So, our final thoughts is, our study was consistent with our hypothesis in that there were sex differences between men and women. Whether the truthfulness or untruthfulness factor in the previous 2003 study was an indicator of how people determined, we see that there is actually evolutionary backing to why people pick specific answers, and that there are indeed sexual differences between men and women, and that women have a higher cost to pick a bad mate and therefore perform in long-term mating versus men who want short-term mating. And these are our sources. Thank you everyone for watching.